Thank you, Robert. See, Robert, excellent job there doing what I would consider the difficult part of the presentation, sort of the why. For me, I get a little bit of the easier part, the how, because I'm more of a technical person. You know, my role within the foundation is working with individuals like you all on, you know, the ways that we make these gifts, the way that we make it happen. You develop the division on your own, and we get you there. We help you with the roadmap. Now, a couple pieces before I start talking about these, because they are of more of a technical nature. You know, one quick point, you know, there's going to be legal aspects because we might talk about wills or trusts. Going to be financial and tax aspects that we might talk about, you know, in some degree of depth, not too bad. Hopefully nobody will fall asleep during it. But I did want to point out that me talking about those things, despite the fact that I am an attorney and a financial planner, speaking about them tonight does not make me your attorney or your financial planner. Really, you should be talking about these things with those individuals and professionals that offer guidance to you in your life. Now, myself, Robert as well, and sure Stuart as well, are available for discussions and consultations. And, you know, we work with those type of individuals a lot. But just something to keep in mind. Another piece, as we talk, is that all of the things that I will be talking about tonight are certainly available through the Presbyterian Foundation. And we are happy to help you do those. You know, you could potentially find some of these other places. But, you know, working with us, you are within the denomination as an official way. And we really love enjoying working with you and building out the churches and really building out the ministry of the denomination as a whole, you know, fourth included. So having said that, I'm going to talk, you know, about a couple different ways to give tonight, maybe 5 or 6. Some of them are going to be during your life. You can go ahead and do that now. Some of them are going to be during your life, and then maybe it happens at the end of your life as far as the gift. Some of them all just happen at the end of your life. So it's really a mixture of different pieces about when we do them or when it actually realizes on the side of the church or the charity that you're helping. But the key part is that we can put those into place, all of those in some degree or another, now, sort of move forward with that, developing that faith legacy and the way we do that. So having said that, I'm going to start to share screen here. First slide, first thing we're going to talk about, I thought I'd do some good news first. And the good news is that you do not have to die to make every gift. You can do some while you're alive. So first wanted to talk about an outright gift. For me, this means a gift that I am making now, or maybe in the near future, but I'm going to give that directly to a charity, and they're going to be able to use it now. Now, I mentioned eligible assets. Really, this could be a myriad of things that you're going to give to a charity. Most common is really cash, you know, passing the plate around the pews at church. Now, I know we're not doing that too much right now, and that's, you know, difficult for us all, but we can still do that in different ways. Another common one, securities, so stocks, bonds, mutual funds. We work with that. I'm sure Fourth can as well, being a large church. But then they can get more technical and difficult. Real estate, business interests, life insurance policies, personal property. Do a lot of different things with outright gifts. One of them, I do want to mention this quick because I think I can bring Stuart in because we've talked about this recently, was as far as giving that gift now, I believe, Stuart, you got a recent gift about, really it's discussion about endowing a pledge.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so somebody came to me with some questions about all of these different instruments and researched them and decided that the best use of their gift right now and they're given all the tax implication and whatnot was just to make an outright gift to the endowment of Fourth Presbyterian Church. And they felt very comfortable with that, and that's something. And the decision about how much this gift was going to be was based on looking at what they typically pledge, and basically, yes, endowing their pledge, saying, okay, this endowment gift will yield enough interest that long after I'm gone, it's as if I'm not gone. Our pledge will continue. So that's an option I just wanted to bring out right at the beginning as you're talking about outright gifts as an option that, again, is available through Fourth Presbyterian Church because we already have a well-established endowment. Mm-hmm. But I just thought I'd bring that up as you're talking about outright gifts because it may be something that folks hadn't thought about.
Mm-hmm. And that what individual came to that decision after working with myself and Stuart, looking at numbers, running numbers, doing a little bit more in-depth analysis. So, again, we're happy to do that with you. These outright gifts, you're typically going to get an immediate tax deduction in that year to be able to use again on the following year, assuming that you itemize. That can, if it's cash, that's great. If it is appreciated property, like a stock, you're going to maybe be able to avoid some capital gains tax. So again, that money, by giving it to a charitable organization like Fourth, you're keeping it for ministry. You're not sending a little bit extra chunk to the government. So really some great benefits there. The charities receive support now when you're doing an outright gift. Sometimes with really a range of charities, they need it now. One that I work with a lot in my line within the denomination is Presbyterian disaster assistance. When something comes up now, there's an immediate need, and unfortunately we have some of those immediate needs in different parts of the country. So again, something to keep in mind, from the fires in the Northwest to hurricanes in the Southeast. There are times when we can't wait. So that is a key critical part, and churches too certainly can use that. There's no real cap on the number of beneficiaries you can receive with an outright gift or give to. Really, it's kind of limited in essence by the amount of funds you have to spread. Occasionally, you might have a specific type of thing that you want to give that might make it difficult to give to more than one charity. An example of that would be, let's see, I had an individual that wanted to give a life insurance policy. He owned it. It was, he was still alive, but it was approaching a value where it was almost equal to the benefit, the death benefit. So he wanted to go ahead and do that, give it to his church that was doing a specific project. If he had wanted to, say, split up more than one and give it to his church and maybe, I don't know, a local food bank. Very, very difficult with that type of asset, with something like a life insurance, to split the policy as a charitable gift. With us, he was able to do that piece. Another example, and this sort of leads into my next one that I'm going to talk about, had an individual with a piece of property. I've worked with several individuals with a piece of property. Extremely difficult to deed the property over to 10 different groups. What we were able to do with that individual was actually put that into, and this will sort of lead into the next one, a donor advised fund. So I'll talk a little bit about a donor advised fund, what they are, how they operate, and some of those advantages. The donor advised fund, what I'd like you to think of it as is an irrevocable charitable checkbook. Donor advised funds are going to be sponsored by a charitable organization. And what they do is a donor creates an account, a donor advised fund account, and then funds that account with something. It could be cash, it could be assets. The example I was just talking about, it was a rental property. And then from there, after they make that irrevocable gift to the donor advised fund, they get a tax deduction in that year. And then they get to choose who the advisor for the fund is. The advisors, their primary role within the fund is to request grants to the organization that operates the DAF to give out to charities. So, for example, one of our donors would send in a grant request to the foundation and say, please send this money or a check to my local church or the local humane society. Really, the options are limitless in terms of who they can support outside of the organization needs to be a public charity. And again, the vast majority of charitable groups fall within that. Lots of different aspects accepted. We were able to accept that rental property, and then what we do as a group is turn around and sell that. And then so that cash, actually, those proceeds get placed into the donor advised fund. I talked with a couple today that were looking to do it simply with cash. Quick, easy to do. Another very common one is appreciated securities. Again, you're going to get that fair market value for that when you put it in as a long-term asset. So, great options there. Again, it's very tax efficient. And then you, again, another option as the donor, you get to choose some degree of choice on how that money is invested. A DAF can be, with us, can be very conservative, so money market. Maybe you're looking at making these gifts very soon, and you don't want the money to fluctuate. Or it can even be built really similar to a retirement account, a 401k, or something like that. Something built for growth. And I'm sure the endowment at fourth is similar to that, so that over time, that initial gift that you put in has time to grow. The charities, again, with the DAF, you can support things immediately. As soon as the funds are available, you can turn around and set up outflows to different charities. Or you can wait. You don't have to disperse money. You can let that money grow until it's a larger gift, again, throughout the course of your life. And you can also, with us, you get sort of two options when you pass away. You can either choose for charities to be named and then receive those funds in whatever percentage you want to designate. So again, at the advisor's death, it's an outright flow. Basically, the account ends and goes out to who you pick. Or you can choose what is called a successor advisor. Those successor advisors essentially come into your role as the advisor of the donor advised fund. Now, most commonly, we're looking at family. That's, again, an institute of a way to teach family stewardship, a faith legacy, some of the things that Robert talked about. You know, this is a vehicle to carry that on across a generation or generations potentially, depending on the specific fund. So really can do a lot of really different and cool things with that. With us, the minimum is $2,500. One interesting tax thing that we've seen over the last couple of years, as far as the strategy goes, is what we call bundling. Now, this came into really a little bit more into vogue when we had a recent change a couple of years ago to the standard deduction. Many of you have had maybe a couple of years now to file under this, so you may have gone from a itemizer to a standard deduction person, and that's very common. Now, what some individuals have done is they have taken, maybe they have an appreciated asset, and they know I typically give, let's say, $10,000 a year to my church. So 10, 20, 30 over the course of 3 years. What they do is, if they have the funds available or the assets, they do all of that gift, that $30,000 over the future 3 years in a single, just in the first year, into the donor advised fund. They get a $30,000 deduction. That is higher than the standard deduction, so they can now itemize and use all the other pieces that they might otherwise use on an itemization. But they don't have to give that $30,000 out in that year. They still give the $10,000 per year to their local church. So the church sees the same cash flow, maybe the same pledge met, but it makes a little bit difference on the tax bill for the individual. Again, that's more money in their pocket or simply available to the charities that they like to support, the churches that they mean a lot to them. So it's a really, really interesting, really flexible tool that has a lot going on for it. So again, something that I would recommend, something that we can do, and something that we'd be happy to talk with you about your specific situation. Let's see. Stuart, I just want to make sure I haven't had any questions.
Yeah,
yet.
You actually have. One
okay.
just
I thought I saw something pop up.
Yep.
If you could let me know.
Right. I think it's a good time to answer because it's DAF related, and it's
okay.
kind of two questions. Well, one's not really a question, but the person pointed out, and they're correct, that you can't use them to fulfill a pledge. You can't use a donor advised fund to buy your table for the Chicago Lights Gala.
Part number 2 is correct.
Yeah.
So it cannot use it for buying something that like the gala table. Now, part number 1, the pledge part. In 2017, at the very end of 2017, there was IRS guidance that went out that basically looked at that pledge issue, because that was a big one within donor advised funds. And they were really looking at more than one issue within donor advised funds. But the pledge one was one of the big ones. And basically what they said was, we're going to allow this to start happening. We're going to give guidance to do this. It's not fully official within the law, but taxpayers may rely upon this. That allowed them to essentially pay a pledge with it, as long as they didn't specifically note denote that it was a pledge. Very odd by the IRS in terms of the way they worded it, but I'd be happy to share that with the group afterwards. Stuart, I can send that to you so that you can see it. It's fairly technical in the language. It's not too long, but I can maybe even highlight those specific parts because that was a very big change at the end of 2017.
And the other, thank you. And the other question that was asked was specifically about DAFs, but I think it's a good question for the whole time that we might want to talk about maybe at the end by itself, is the whole idea with fees. What are the fees that are associated with the DAF, with the Presbyterian Foundation?
Yeah.
And how, and what are, because I mean, every DAF, regardless of whether who you have it with, has a fee. And if we could just sort of talk in general about fees so that people are made aware of those. So like I said, I don't know if you want to do that now or if you want to wait and talk about it at the end after we
I can talk about it quickly now, and then maybe sort of a broad general part in relation to that. So with the Presbyterian Foundation, our fee is 90 basis points or 0.9% on an annual basis as the administrative fee. That is in line with other organizations like ourselves, the size of us. Now, you might find, a mega corporation, Fidelity Charitable, something that just has an incredible amount of money in it, or you could get a lower fee. Maybe it's 0.6%. It's still within line, still not a huge difference between 0.6 and 0.9, but still a fee attached to that administration. Now, the difference is, obviously with us, specifically to our foundation, is that fee goes to the individuals, the systems that are really a part of the denomination. The foundation's mission is to support the PCUSA, its missions, its ministries. A lot different than Fidelity. Fidelity is a charitable organization, but it does not have the tie to the overall umbrella and the structure that your church is a part of, that we do. So, with our fee, you get a small group, within the group that works with you. It's not a huge, large organization where you're just going into a queue. We've got a group of 2-3 people, individuals, myself, maybe as a fourth, that kind of know your account. You get a person to talk to, and generally one of the same couple people to talk to. But you are right that the vast majority of charitable gifts, or charitable vehicles, I should say, have some degree of fee within that. Yep. So I think as far as the fees, if there's more questions that come up later on, we can talk about those. But I'll move on to the next one unless there was another question. No. Okay. Let's go on to another form of giving that is a mixture of potentially giving during your life and giving at the end of your life. This is giving with an IRA or direct from an IRA. A very easy way, a typical way, certainly in the past, has been to name the church, charity of your choice, as a remainder beneficiary of the IRA. Very easy from a logistical standpoint to do this. You're simply going to the IRA provider, asking for a beneficiary designation form, and then putting the information of the charities you want to receive it, the church you want to receive it, in there. Now, those individuals, those churches can be a primary one, meaning that at your death, they are entitled to that portion that you give them, or they can be a contingent one. And I see this a lot within my day-to-day. And, perhaps the primary one is almost always maybe a spouse or certainly children as well. But if there is no spouse, there are no children, or if they don't survive, maybe that person puts the church in as the remainder contingent beneficiary to receive it if nobody else is there. Very great, very easy as far as getting it implemented. It's just usually a single piece of paper and no real cost to doing that at all. And a great way, especially from a tax efficiency standpoint. Remember with a IRA, if it is a traditional IRA or 401k, thing like that, the money as it comes out to you or any individual you name as a successor is taxable. It wasn't taxed before it went in. That's sort of the break that we get for allowing it to grow tax-free for a while. It's taxable when it comes out. Now, if I leave that portion to a church, well, it's a charitable organization. It's tax exempt. When the church pulls the money out of the IRA, they don't have a tax bill. So again, another effective use of something where we can really get some tax benefits. You do, again, good news, you don't have to wait until the end of your life to give your IRA. You can use it during your life. Now, this is called a qualified charitable distribution. What happens here is the individual that owns the IRA directs the organization that manages for them. So I'll use Fidelity, for example. They direct Fidelity to send a check from their IRA account directly to their local church. They have to meet a couple different things to do this. Key factor is the donor must be 70 and a half at the time that this request takes place. I should point out there is that we have some confusion earlier this year. The law was changed towards the end of last year that as far as distributions from your IRA account, when do they have to start? Because all of us have to start taking at a certain point on those. In the past, the language was in the year in which you turned 70 and a half. So this QCD language was fairly close. You had to be specifically 70 and a half, but it was at least close. The new language for RMDs, for your IRAs, for the person, is now the year in which you turn 72. Now this, the qualified charitable distribution language, has not yet changed. So it is still 70 and a half. So you can actually do a distribution to your church and have the tax benefits of this before you actually have to do it on your own as an RMD. They might correct that. They might change that in the future. That could be something where I could see a change, but hasn't happened yet. Now, when we do this, it's got some great benefits. The primary benefit is that that money that would have been taxable when it comes to you is no longer considered taxable. It's no longer income. Because of that, when you give it to the church, it does not generate a tax deduction. Even if the church acknowledges or your local charity says, you're entitled to this tax deduction. With this one, it's a little different. That would essentially be double dipping. If you got a charitable deduction and it never counted as income, we can't do that. Now, even though it's not considered taxable income on the way out when it goes to the charity, it does count to your RMD. So at this point, now with sort of the age change, it's really going to be very beneficial for individuals over 72. Great way for them to make gifts to the church. You're, again, up to $100,000. That's per person. Overall, one of the most tax efficient ways to do this, even logistically, just requesting a check. And from a charity standpoint, ourselves being one and other churches we work with, I know it's always easiest to simply receive cash or a check to do it instead of as far as processing. That charity, that church is going to give you substantiation. Remember that even though this isn't income, you don't get a charitable deduction, it is still tracked on your income tax return. There is still a spot for it. It's just not where it used to be in the charitable deduction section. Just again, these are fairly new as far as their permanency. They've been around for a while, but permanent back in 2015. Another quick little note for you individuals that might be doing this. Every year when you take a distribution from your IRA, you're going to get that reported to you on a 1099-R. 1099-Rs have not yet distinguished between what goes to you and your bank account, meaning it's taxable to you, and what might go out through a charitable distribution directly to a church. So again, on your reporting from the organization you have there, it's one lump sum. You break that out into the two different pieces on your own personal tax return. Just a little tip there to, again, work with when you're working with your CPA. So again, some great ways to do this. And, it might affect, Medicare, a lot of other different things kind of built into your adjusted gross income. Doing this way actually keeps that adjusted gross income down. So again, great benefits, easy to do, and a great way to use your IRA account to supplement or even replace some of the other sources you were maybe using as your charitable gifting source. And this is true regardless of whether you itemize or use the new standard deduction. Again, 90% of people are expected to use the new standard deduction here going forward. So this is really something that's available to, all the people over 70, really 70 and a half, maybe 72 if you want the extra tax benefits, regardless of whether you itemize.
Joe,
Yes.
there's a question from Charlie. Wants us to make sure to be careful to differentiate between a traditional IRA versus a Roth IRA when talking about this. And also he's highlighting that, I'm sorry, I'm assuming Charlie is a man. That may not be a safe assumption. I apologize if I misstated there, but Charlie is also suggesting that because in 2020 you're not required to take your RMD, that you may want to consider letting it roll this year rather than doing a qualified charitable
That's
distribution.
an excellent point. So a couple of different points within that. I'm reading the question now. These are traditional IRAs. This is where they must come from. Not a Roth IRA, not an ongoing SEP, not a 401k, really limited to traditional IRAs. I have an individual, for example, that I work with out in the mountain, out in West, that individual, he has an ongoing SEP. That specific type of IRA doesn't count. He makes a $50,000 addition a year through using this, very large gift for that individual. What he has to do is roll it out of his SEP into a traditional, which he only basically has that structure in place to then be able to make this gift. So where it's coming out of from is important. So yes, absolutely. Traditional IRAs. The 2020, you're right, in that this year, no RMDs. Some individuals may have already taken that, but don't know if that's going to be continued next year or not. That really would depend on Congress action. And then on the amount that you can give, the limit is $100,000. You can absolutely do more than your RMD. You're not limited to the RMD. You just, again, after you go over your RMD is not going to carry over to the next year or anything like that. So you can't do more. It's just most people tend to look at that RMD. Again, that is the minimum amount that you are required to take out without having to get some penalties for not doing it. So certainly would want to at least do that, but you can go higher than that if you want. It's just, again, you don't have to if you don't want to. So I think that covered the question. It looked like that one went away now. So I'll go ahead and maybe move on to the next topic. Yeah, so charitable remainder trust. Again, another vehicle that we use a lot of within the foundation. At one point, the foundation was a trustee on these. Now we use you can see it there for the investment and trust management, the New Covenant Trust Company. It's our wholly owned subsidiary where we do a lot of work with churches and individuals on church finances, church taxes, trusts like this for individuals, just a lot of work. What a charitable remainder trust is, now we're talking about something where it's a little bit different here. Again, it's an irrevocable trust, but it's a specific type of trust, really governed in large part by the IRS regulations, but also trust law within the different states. With this one, it is an example of a what I would call a life income vehicle. What that means is that I'm going to set something up, and for most owners, that's going to pay them income during their lives, and then at their death, it's going to pay out to the charity. Other ones, we're going to talk about a pooled income fund next. They would fall into that. A charitable gift annuity, a lot of people have heard of those. Again, that's a life income style gift, something where you're going to get income for a while, and then typically at the death of the individuals, that's when it's going to go to charities. Depending on the style of charitable remainder trust, we have two different styles of the remainder trust. One's an annuity trust. Those pay a specific dollar amount every year until the individual dies or the trust runs out of money, whichever happens first. A unit trust, it actually pays a set percentage every year. So the amount you receive goes up and down based on the value of the trust, but the percentage stays the same. So for example, 5%. You get 5% of the value every year, but the value is going to switch. So again, some different options within that. With the charitable remainder trust, you're setting up an irrevocable vehicle with the local attorney. You know, we can help with that as far as a template and trying to keep costs down there. And the way you fund this trust, you really have a large range of options. You can do it with cash or checks or something like that. What we see most often is some sort of appreciated asset, something that has gone up in value. A couple examples of some individuals I've worked with recently. One was late last year, a lady that had received stock from her mother I think the first distribution she got, the first gift was maybe in the late 50s, early 60s, and had gotten some more over the following years and decades. And that stock was incredibly appreciated, as appreciated as any that I've personally dealt with in a stock, as far as the trust. It was her basis, what was paid for it was, I believe, $1,500, and the value of the stock in December of last year was a little over $100,000. So she had a massive capital gain and a single stock, all eggs in one basket. And if she had sold it outright, pretty substantial, almost, $15,000 capital gain tax bill due following April. Now, what putting it into that trust did, the trust, once the thing, we put it in kind into the trust, meaning she didn't sell it first. She gifted that stock directly to the trust. Once it got in there, it's a qualified vehicle, similar to your IRA. So when we sold that stock, there was a capital gain that was remembered, but the trust does not have to pay it immediately the following year. It gets to hold on to that and actually reinvest it. So that money, that $15,000 that would otherwise gone out, gets to grow over time. Now, as that individual, as she receives payments over the course of her life, portion of that capital gain goes out every year. But so she got to spread that out over years. And honestly, her gain was so large, it's going to be spread out over decades, assuming she lives that long. So, and in the meantime, it gets to do a lot of work for her. So really incredible in terms of what you can do with that. I've had other individuals that had a large gain in rental property. Again, rental property, because one, they bought it decades ago. The value of the property had gone up in that case, but depreciation, because it was a business asset, means that their basis kept going down. So they were going in opposite ways. Again, huge gain. We're able to sell that and then reinvest the money in a diversified portfolio. In both cases, their eggs were all in one basket, whether it was a single stock or it was a single piece of property. When we were sold that reinvest, we're talking about a diversified portfolio with mutual funds that hold thousands of stocks. So really able to help them in that regard. Now, with a charitable remainder trust, the remainder really speaks to when does the charity receive the money. So with remainder trust, it's really at the death of the individuals that you nominate to receive the income during the life of the trust. Typically, it's the donor and their spouse, maybe donor and their children. We have to run certain calculations for them to even be able to qualify for this up front. So we just work with that. But then at their death, goes to the charity or the church that they choose. There are a thing called a charitable lead trust. So switching lead for remainder means that the charity actually receives money for the life of the individual. And then at the end of that person's life, the money comes back into their estate. We don't see those anywhere near as often. I mean, much more rare today compared to your typical charitable remainder trust. But in the right situation, they might work. There's no real cap on how many beneficiaries you can support with a trust. But honestly, I'd say most common, you might support maybe 1 to 5, something like that. You do have the ability to, within that trust language, when you set it up, retain the right to change those beneficiaries. So, these might last years or decades. Charities, they, like everything else, change over time. So retaining that right can be really beneficial, especially if the person's younger and they're looking at a long time as far as the outlook for the life of the trust. You can have future family involvement. I mean, you can name children as a potential successor beneficiary or even a current beneficiary. And also, again, it has to go to a charity at the end. A donor advised fund is absolutely considered a charity. It's a gift to a charity to start one. You could name a child as what would be the initial advisor of a newly created DAF. Or you could even set up a donor advised fund during your life, and this charitable remainder trust can pour over into it at your death when they become a successor advisors. A lot of different options about including family in it in a variety of ways. Now, for us, the minimum to open a new charitable remainder trust is $100,000. No, that's a large number for a lot of people, but within the charitable remainder trust world, It's actually a fairly smaller amount in terms of the minimum open. You know, some of them might go to several $100,000 to higher. So what we try to do is work with individuals where we can on that.
Joe, question on that. Anybody go lower on a charitable remainder trust?
They might. If again, so this is a distinction perhaps between ourselves and maybe some other places that offer it. You know, with us, with the New Covenant Trust Company offering it as the trustee, whoever that end beneficiary is named, it's not going to be the New Covenant Trust Company. It's going to be some outside third-party charity. It does not have to be the foundation. You know, it's often local church. So on that one, you know, it really does need to be that. No, so that's why it's a certain amount for us just to be able to manage it, because there are aspects as far as the trustee goes that are administrative duties. This is an irrevocable instrument. That means it's got its own tax return that needs to be filed. We're providing you with the payments, the investment management, the tax filing every year. There's a lot that goes into that. So for us, it's a matter of making it start at a point that makes sense for us from an administrative standpoint, and for you and for the charity too. You know, we have a lower point of that, but we actually have a little bit higher sort of expectation of what will be left for the charity than even the IRS does, as far as what the payout rate is. Other places that might go lower, maybe a college, something like that. Now, if a college is taking on the role of a trustee, they're going to expect themselves to be the remainder beneficiary of that. So maybe they can recoup some of those fees, things like that, within that regard. But even then, you're not going to see them a whole lot lower than maybe $100,000.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Yep.
Let me add, Joe, if I may, I just want to add on to that and then share another brief example. So yeah, I think Joe's exactly right. If the end beneficiary is going to act as trustee, you may see a lower minimum. However, if you go to trust banks or financial advisors, many of them, you're going to see their minimum is closer to $500,000. So we are significantly lower than most of the trust banks and advisors out there. And we wanted to make it accessible to as many people as possible. But to Joe's point about being able to involve future family members, I worked with a couple a few years back on developing a charitable remainder trust, and the way they structured it was both husband and wife had shared assets, but they also had individual assets. And so how they structured their charitable remainder trust was when the first of the two died, their assets would create the charitable trust and begin to pay the surviving spouse for the rest of the surviving spouse's life. And then when the surviving spouse died, their assets would be added to the trust, and they would begin to pay their daughter income and for their daughter's life. And then when their daughter passed away, it was then going to pay their granddaughter until she turned 40. And then after she turned 40, that's when the trust had to kick to the charities. And they had, I believe, if I'm remembering right, they had 4 different charities they were paying, including their local church. So these really are flexible vehicles that can take care of income, not only for yourself, but for spouses and children and even grandchildren. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, excellent points, Robert. And then to add to that, you know, as far as additions, you mentioned that. I mentioned charitable unit trust and annuity trust. An annuity trust is set it when it's made, can't make additions to it. A unit trust can make additions over that individual's life at their death. So again, you can a little bit more flexibility with the unit trust compared to the annuity trust. And again, to your point, a lot of people make these during their lives and they start paying them during their lives for the tax benefits. But you can absolutely include this as a component of your will or your estate plan. So it can happen at death too. So really a flexible instrument. And one of the key drivers is what's the asset? What are we funding it with? How are we doing that? And that can lead to a lot more discussions. And again, willing to work with you on that, on the calculations, all the different aspects of it. You and really your attorney, I work with attorneys all the time on things like this. Any other questions there on the trust there? Looks like
yes.
any.
Charlie.
Okay, so Charlie put a great point again, and I'm not sure when exactly this one came in on gift exclusions, real estate, special collections, and gift acceptance policy. So again, to know your policies of the group that you're giving to, I think that's a great point. We have our own gift acceptance policy that are specific to each one of these different instruments that I've talked about. Some of them can accept stuff, some of them cannot. So if you're making a direct gift to any charity, that's something that you might want to check with them first.
And Fourth Church has one, yes.
Yep. So again, very, very, some of it's policy driven, some of it is, regulation driven. Some things, some vehicles, like let's say pooled income fund can't accept certain things. It cannot, just by the regulations accept real property, for example. So land, I couldn't have done the rental property within this. So pooled income fund, another, let's talk about that sort of for a little while. It's another life income plan. So it's an irrevocable gift. So again, similar to a charitable remainder trust. A little bit smaller on what can be taken in here in terms, it's primarily cash and securities, long-term held. On this one, the investment managers with us, with the foundation, it is it's all done within our own group. The money is pooled into a single trust that people essentially can join with a donation into that. So that's where you get the pooled from. They all go together in a single trust governed by a single instrument. Again, must be managed by a charity. You're going to get a tax deduction here. On these, again, the beneficiaries, they receive that money at the death of the individual. For us, this is a little more limited. Generally, one beneficiary. If it's a larger amount, it might be more than one beneficiary, but there's a little bit more strict guidelines on pooled income funds about who can be that beneficiary. For us, we're part of the PCUSA. It must be a part of the PCUSA. So church, Presbyterian, Synod, the foundation, mission agency, all those are part of our larger umbrella organization of the denomination, all acceptable. But once we go to something totally disconnected, probably can't do that within the PIF itself as a direct gift. Again, you can name people as family involvement, similar as the charitable remainder trust. They can be an income beneficiary or a successor beneficiary, or they could be the advisor on a DAF that you create at the end of the PIF. One example of future family involvement is pretty cool. Actually, I had it earlier this year. I had a father that was a pastor that set up a couple different pooled income funds for his children. It went to, and then actually set up for himself and his wife first. They received it. End of their life went to daughter. The daughter received that income for decades. This was set up originally in the 70s. She called earlier this year and said, you know what, I don't want to, it's not a huge amount I'm receiving. I'd like to relinquish this. Can we do that? I said, we can work with you on that. She said, well, who's it going to? I told her the church. It was a church that her father served. She said, well, can I call them and ask what they would do with that? I said, well, I can't, but please feel free to call and maybe say you're thinking about giving a donation. What would they do with it? Well, she called and said, I'm thinking about giving a donation of $9,000, the value that we were able to distribute. It turns out that they said, we have been looking for this. Our church needs a new roof fix that is exactly $9,000. Sometimes they just work out well. But again, it's still future family involvement. The father didn't know that this would happen. And when that daughter, who is now decades older than when this was set up, found that out, it meant so much to her in a way that, had she not done it, had she not done it during her life, she wouldn't have got to see. So again, flexibility. With us, a new fund, $10,000. And then you can make additions to a pooled income fund. There's no minimum on there's a $2,000 minimum on addition. So we go from $10,000 down to $2,000 on them additions to them. A neat thing about them is they're a net income gift, meaning that the principal is invested. You, as the individual that benefits from it, get the net income off of that, of your amount, your portion of the principal. But we're not dipping into that principal to make the payments out to you. Now, that's a big difference from, say, a charitable gift annuity. Charitable gift annuities, the payments back to the individual can and certainly do often dip into that principal of the gift. And they're in fact set up in a way that they sort of expect maybe 50% of the gift to be there. Pooled income funds as a net income gift don't do that. You know, they'll fluctuate with the market, they're invested, but they have the option, the ability to potentially grow over time. Again, great from the charity standpoint that they get to do that.
And Joe, you said this is one that is rarely, you can't really find too many PIFs other
No,
than,
you don't see too many pooled income funds out there anymore. Not as many, certainly not the degree you might see a charitable remainder trust, certainly not DAFs, anything like that. But as far as an instrument, again, not too many. Again, schools might be, colleges might be a place where you see this, just not as much as you did in the past.
Can I ask, is the one at the Presbyterian Foundation pretty robust? Is there a lot of interest in it?
As far as the amount in it, a couple $1 million. I think it's off the top of my head, there might be $4 million in one fund, maybe $10 million in another fund. Okay. We offer two different ones, sort of two different investment options, two different styles that might suit different donors.
Does it have a lot of people involved in it? That was my bigger question.
You know, I'm not sure about the total number of individuals. Again, these are sort of specialized instruments, right situation, right person, right assets to do that. Fairly simple to do, though. You don't need an attorney. It's an application. So something that, as far as the cost, don't really need a lot.
And Stuart, we, as you know, we used to offer charitable gift annuities, and when we stopped offering charitable gift annuities, these became the option in place of that, and that's because we believe these are a better gift vehicle than a charitable gift annuity, because of what Joe was describing about how much is left for the charity. These pooled income funds will leave a larger amount for charity than a charitable gift annuity will. And that's our goal at the foundation, is to help people make gifts. So,
right. As Joe, I thought you mentioned that with some charitable gift annuities, sometimes the payments out sort of eat into the principal, so that there can be nothing left for the
it's a possibility. It's a possibility, and that's a common misconception when they were opened. Again, lots of different things that can go on there. This one has maybe a little bit more stability with again the charitable aspect, because it's just a net income. So I mean, again, it fluctuates with the market, but again, there's protection of principal there that we really think, and I've seen play out with payouts that we've had that really benefits the churches. Last one that I want to talk about tonight here is a charitable bequest or a beneficiary designation. Both of these, they really happen. You set it in place during your life, but it doesn't happen until the end. Charitable bequest, that's where we're really talking two primary sources. You're going to see that. The one most of us heard of, certainly wills, and then also a trust can include that type of bequest. That's where I am designating something, maybe it's cash, maybe it's a thing, maybe it's a piece of property, to go to the church upon my death. You know, Robert talked about that at the end, at the beginning with the will that he discussed with that individual. You know, a very common, very easy thing. You know, great thing about it is that we can go ahead and set that in place. You still have access to that thing, that asset, whatever it is, for your entire life. You can still use it if you need it. You give it to other people. You can change your mind, but you're going ahead and making a difference at the end of your life. And for many people, and honestly, for the churches themselves, it's the largest gift they've ever given. And for a lot of churches, it's the largest gift they'll ever receive from that individual for other individuals. You know, so great way to do that. Again, you're working with an attorney there, a will or trust. I strongly recommend. I know I'm an attorney, but I'm going to recommend working with an attorney to get that done. You know, with us, you would be working with us. I work with attorneys outside all the time on this type of gifts. We do them in different ways so that people can retain flexibility and change their mind over time and make that as easy from a logistic standpoint as possible. But it's not just wills or trust. No, you can also do a beneficiary designation. A couple different ways to do that depending on the assets. We talked about IRAs, you know, leaving the church as a remainder beneficiary. You can do it on life insurance. You can do it on other things. I talked with a lady last week about what would be called a transfer on death deed. It's where she wants to put her church on the deed during her life. They have no ownership interest during her life, basically until she dies. And when she dies, the deed is the process by which it gets switched over to the church. And that was going to be the largest gift of her life. So again, ways to do this, different transfer on death things that can really benefit your church forth at your death. Here you're looking at an estate tax deduction. From planning standpoint, that can be great for the individuals that have an estate tax due. Now, I will point out that at least under current law, federal tax law, that's the vast majority of us are not going to have an estate tax due. That's over $11 million per person, and married couples can combine. That is set to sunset. We could see changes, but it comes into play a little bit more usually at the state level. States, if they have a tax due, an estate tax, a death, an inheritance tax, typically comes in at a lower type of level, lower point, entry point than the federal tax system. But again, despite the tax consequences, important to do. Let's see, no real cap again on the beneficiaries. You can choose as many of you want. You're sort of limited by the amount you have to give and maybe the asset. Again, same way with us, you can involve your future family by creating a DAF. It's a replacement in a way. It's a cost-effective replacement for the individuals that don't have just millions and millions of dollars to sort of maybe take the place of a family foundation. Again, those can be a true family foundation. Great for the individuals that have a fairly significant amount of assets. There's a lot of administrative burden, there's tax burden, there's things that happen with those that you just don't have with the DAF, but they can do a lot of the same things. So again, you can involve your family in the future as well with this as well. And again, we're happy to do that, happy to work with that on all of the things that I've talked about tonight. Now I see, looking at this time, we're at about the time I think we wanted to be to sort of wrap up. Again, all the stuff that we've talked about there, and we can see this in this last key advantages, sort of the middle one. It's what Robert started with. All the stuff we're talking about, whether it's during your life, into your life, you're leaving a legacy of your faith and your stewardship. A way to really show that to the world, the things, the people that care to you, really, great ways to do this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, we have reached about where we wanted to be for as far as time goes, but I'm willing, if Joe and Robert are willing to stay on for just a little bit long, and if there are some other questions, I wanted to just, the very first question that was asked is still up there. I just wanted to make it clear that, as all those of you involved with Fourth know, that Chicago Lights is our social service entity, and we share a lot of services together, including the endowment. So it's possible, the same endowment that's well managed for the church is also manages endowment gifts for Chicago Lights. So there is that opportunity. In fact, the one that I mentioned who is endowing their pledge is, a percentage of it's going to the church and a percentage is going to Chicago Lights. So if there are other questions, or feel free to put them in there.
So Stuart, while you're looking at that, maybe some people are typing in questions. I will maybe even show this. We do have a couple handouts that people can use.
Please.
And Stuart, they're available at our website. Stuart has them. He can maybe email them to you. We have an estate planning workbook. So what the estate planning workbook is, it is a workbook. It's something we do. And it is, as you can see as I scroll down, sort of a fill in the blank thing. And really this allows you to sort of have in a single place something where you can put your information about your estate plan and your current holdings, some of your assets, some of the other pieces, and where it certainly helps the person that fills it out to kind of get organized. But a great help is if you put this with your will or your estate planning documents, the person that can really help is the executor of your estate. Now, prior to joining the foundation, I worked at another trust company. We handled estates. I can tell you, unless the person told us about it, we don't always know about the things. We have to do a lot of research, find stuff, search. This is great for helping us, for whoever it might be, whether it's a trust company, a bank, your children. We don't always know all of the stuff about our family members and where their stuff is. This is a great thing for that. let's see, I think I have to hit stop share first and then maybe share again. We have one other one that is the composing a legacy. So that is this one, and it really covers some of the stuff that we talked about tonight. So it's about estate planning, why we do it, different ways to do it, wills, IRAs, a lot of the other stuff. So it's sort of a refresher about what we did in a written format for individuals. Now, with that said, I'm going to mute myself here and maybe go to some questions.
Let's see, I don't really see any other questions, but I do appreciate. So let me say a couple of things in conclusion here. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and share my slide, share my screen again.
Stuart, while you're doing that,
Sure.
Charlie's added again another wonderful point. Charlie says brochures are good, but church leaders need to know that planned giving involves building relationships over a period of time rather than a one-time ask like an annual stewardship campaign. Having good member database is also important. And Charlie's exactly right, particularly when we're talking about major gifts and we're talking about planned gifts. This really is about relationship and helping individuals feel comfortable with the gifts they're making, relationships between the end beneficiary and the donor who's making it, relationships between people like me and Joe who might be helping along in the process. So Charlie, you're absolutely right. I couldn't have said it any better than you did. So thank you again for a great point.
So thank you again for doing this. Welcome your feedback on this presentation. Please, I see my email address here on this last one. We are planning to keep doing this like every other month. We have a couple of ideas for November, but if you have something that would really help you right now, please let us know, and we will see what we can do to get that happen. So yes, and as I mentioned, I was sending you the slides and the 2 documents that Joe just mentioned in the next couple of days with an email to each one of you in thanking you for this, and seeing if there's any way that I can help or we can help. So again, thank you so much for all of your time tonight. I appreciate this. I hope it's helpful. And if there's no other final questions, I think we can call it a night. And thanks, enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody. And thanks again to Joe and Robert for this. And I am, as you all know, I'm available for this. And Robert's point about relationships, I've 100%, or Charlie's point, excuse me, about relationships, I 100% agree. That's what we're doing here, is building relationships that will last and make a big impact and difference on the ministry of Fourth Presbyterian Church. So talk to me anytime. Thank you again, and we will see you soon.
Yeah, and thank you from us as well for having us, being a part of this. Happy to do that, and we're certainly available to talk as well.